Hello everyone out there. So one of the things I like to do with knives, I enjoy collecting some early Kershaws. So these are Kershaws that were USA production, and there aren't too many of those anymore in the Kershaw branding, so I tend to pick these older knives up on eBay. And so if you've ever shopped online on eBay, you know a lot of the knives you're going to get are used, of course, and a lot of them have been kind of thrashed over the years. So this particular one is the Kershaw Piston, and I just picked it up, and the actual auction for this knife was located in Florida. So I had an idea that this knife was going to have some honest wear and tear on it. And so we'd see some corrosion, things like that. And not only that, but when I looked at this auction online, the seller's pictures were a little bit less than stellar. They were kind of blurry, and maybe purposely so, because they were probably trying to hide some of the damage on the knife. But that being said, you know, the price was right, so I picked it up anyway, because I knew as soon as it came in I would have to clean it out anyway. And it's just a good idea whenever you're buying one of these knives used. A lot of the times they've led a really long life as a user, so you're going to see some really honest wear and tear on these knives, and that's not a bad thing. And a lot of the time you can just clean it right up. So what I'm doing with this one, the Kershaw Piston here, I'm just taking it apart. I'm going to look for any corrosion that could be in here, and I'm just going to clean it up as best as I can and reassemble it. And so I've never owned a Kershaw Piston before, nor taken one apart. But once you take apart one of the Kershaw knives that have these Speed Safe mechanisms in it, as you can see right here, they're all very similar to put back together. So we can see the torsion bar right there has some serious corrosion on it. A little bit of redness here on this plate that holds the torsion bar in. But that'll clean up really nicely, I think. I don't think that'll be a problem. But the knife came apart really easily. All the Torx bits were nice and high quality. The pivot right here on the blade, you can see it's just dirty. There's a little bit of redness in there, but I think that'll come right off. You know, so these parts do come apart really easily. Helps you clean the knife nice and easily. This knife does run on the phosphor bronze washers, and all of these bead blasted stainless pieces on the inside. Bead blast tends to pick up rust really easily, but luckily that lock bar doesn't look too bad. So I'm just going to kind of give everything a nice good soaking here and try and clean it up the best I can. The way I clean things, I just use some isopropyl alcohol. I think this is a 90%. Pour it into a bowl and just start dipping items in and scrubbing them off. So I'm just going to start with the items that have the most obvious wear on them. So we can see it comes right off though. So it's really not anything more than surface wear, surface damage. So this little plate right here, you can see most of that redness, that rust just came right off. So no issues there. Same thing with the torsion bar. When I scrub that thing down, there should be no problems with you know, lasting damage or anything. So this particular piece, you could see just scrubbing it on, and this is actually just a little plastic brush. It came in a kit from the Dollar Tree, so it's really nothing fancy. Paper plate, this is about as low budget of a cleaning as you're going to get on a knife. But I felt it was kind of necessary just for this piece, because I like these pieces more as collector pieces than anything. They don't have to be in prime condition, but I do like them usable, you know, in case I decide to carry a knife, you know, here and there. The blade on this knife was a stonewash blade, which is nice because the stonewash does hide some of the damage that rust can cause. And in the video here, a lot of the rust on the blade doesn't really show through. You know, you can see it more in person, but you really have to thrash a knife in order to get rust to last on a stonewash blade. You know, so this knife definitely did lead a very busy life. And so I just want to clean out that pivot area, because in a folding knife, the pivot is the one moving piece, really. And so it does tend to pick up a lot of gunk over time, whether you try to or not. And, you know, taking it apart is really the easiest way to get that out. So you can just see some of the markings on there from the damage. Unfortunately, most of the spotting on the actual blade itself didn't really come off in this cleaning, but you know, I did what I could to minimize it. And again, even in the video, it doesn't really come out very easily. I'll try and highlight it later. But unless you're looking at it in person and look for it, the stonewash does a pretty good job of hiding corrosion. So there's that. Pocket clip here is bead blasted. So even though the blade is stone washed, the pocket clip is bead blasted. And I could polish out those little rust stains on it. But then once you polish bead blast, it tends to start to look more satin. And I kind of just wanted to keep the original look to the pocket clip. So the only real corrosion spots on the pocket clip were where the screws go in, and those are going to be hidden anyway. So other than that, it just had really minimal spotting. So not much more to do with the pocket clip. And luckily the lock bar piece right here was super clean. Like there was really no corrosion on this piece as it was. So just wiping it down is all it really needed. And these nice little phosphor bronze washers, those just need cleaning. You know, there's no corrosion on there at all. You just want to wipe them down, get any, you know, chunks of crud off of them. But yeah, so overall it cleaned up pretty nicely. The G10 wasn't even really that dirty, but I just wanted to give it a quick scrubbing to get any loose particles off of it. If you look closely, like in the little bowl of alcohol, you can see all these little particles that have come off of these pieces. So there was a lot of junk on here. And so it's always very satisfying to get that stuff off of the knife so that you can clean it out well. This particular G10 scale has the cutout for the torsion bar, so you're going to see some grease from the factory that I'm scrubbing out right now. And the grease in there is to help keep that bar lubricated, as well as to keep it from rattling in there. So I'm going to replace the grease when I reassemble it. But just cleaning the piece out is nice, and you know, making sure everything is pretty much back to stock, how it should be. So reassembling the knife, you know, I've never owned a piston before, so reassembling it can cause some issues, but this one went fairly easily back together. When you reassemble, I tend to use some kind of a lubricant around the washers just to help with it. And now these Speedsafe knives don't always even really need a whole lot of lube, so I'm just putting in a few drops of KPL in there to help with the knife's opening and closing. But it's kind of arguable whether it really needed it or not. Putting back in that pin for the lanyard, I probably shouldn't have taken it out because it really didn't need to come out in order to disassemble it. I was just more curious. And so I had to kind of use some pliers right there just to press it back into place, because it was you know, a very tight fit in the G10 scale. It did come in pretty nicely though. But yeah, just putting the knife back together, we're just going to lubricate everything. One of the things I always do with these knives, whenever you're using a Speedsafe knife, you have that torsion bar in there, and it's always kind of, I want to say difficult, but it's always a challenge to get that torsion bar, you know, right back in the correct hole to make it function and try and sandwich everything back together again. That's really the challenge with reassembling these knives. You know, for whatever reason, when I was reassembling it, I did not try and deassist the knife, so I'm not sure if I could have actually done that or not. I should have tried while I had it all apart. But there you go, in that black G10 cavity right there, I'm putting some grease in there. And this is kind of like a silicone grease. It's not the same type of stuff the factory used, but I definitely wanted to put something in there because a lot of the time if you don't grease up the torsion bar pocket, then that little torsion bar, that spring, is going to rattle whenever the knife is open, and it's kind of noticeable. So you want something in there to kind of hold it in place and provide a little bit of corrosion protection as well while it's in there. So here we go with the most probably challenging part of putting the knife back together. You want to get that stop pin back in place. You kind of want to test fit to find out where that torsion bar fits into the blade on that little hole next to the pivot. And you want to hope everything doesn't fall apart while you try and do it. So this is kind of a challenge. And so I left most of this honestly in real time just so you can kind of see the process here. Just a lot of test fitting. So even though the knife came apart like a dream, getting it back together is more of a challenge. Not impossible, and you'll see in a few minutes I'll be done with it anyway. But this particular one, the backspacer, that long plastic black backspacer, was part of holding the frame together. So it's really important to get that piece in first. So putting this backspacer back in place, you'll notice the screws actually go through it, and it helps hold that plate for the torsion bar in place. So putting this in first makes a huge difference in reassembly, disassembly. But again, I've never messed with the piston before, so that was just part of the learning curve. And honestly, I'll probably never have to take this knife apart again, because now that it's nice and clean, I don't anticipate it having any long-term issues or concerns. So you just got to lay that plate right on top of the backspacer, center it on the pivot, and then you just press that G10 scale on there, you know, cross your fingers and hope everything just clicks, you know, and gets right back to where it should be. So a little bit of fidgeting went with it, but it came back together nice enough. So the construction on these USA-made Kershaws were always really good. There was rarely ever any issues. The screws don't strip. Everything comes apart easily, goes back together easily. There you go. The torsion bar worked. The Speed Safe still works. You just want to make sure to get everything mostly back where it is. And if you've ever taken apart a knife, you know the hardest part is just keeping all the parts on the table, because these little screws tend to want to fly across the room. The different little pins inside, sometimes those guys want to fall on the ground, and they can be really hard to find if you are not careful. So the centering on this one wasn't great to begin with, and I never did get it really centered. But just tightening the pivot, you know, testing, you want to get that right balance of opening speed as well as being able to deploy the knife fully and make sure there's no blade play. You know, that's part of the game there. So just working on that for right now. About to put the pocket clip back on as well. But it's always satisfying to clean out these old knives, especially when you can see they've led a long life, a lot of use in the real world. And these USA-made Kershaws, this particular one is out of production. But again, nice to get a nice sample of it. I believe this one came with the box as well, which is one of the reasons why I picked it up, because I always like having the original box whenever possible. So action works good. No blade play. Centering's not great. It is leaning to the show side, but you know, it works and it's functional. So really what I got to test now is the sharpness, and this blade is dull. It has a lot of minor chipping on it. That's why through this whole process I didn't bother to even tape up the edge, because it's dull, very dull. So I'm going to sharpen it. For most of these things I use my Ken Onion blade grinder attachment to sharpen. So let's just get a nice edge on this blade and check it out. And now that the edge is sharp, no issues there, and I'm going to give you some close-ups too in just a few seconds of some of the spotting on the stonewash blade. It's kind of hard to see. I'm trying to show you right now, but it's really hard to see on camera. You know, you really got to be there in person to see it. But again, the blade itself sharpened up super easy. This is, I think, 14C28N, so nice Sandvik steel. Very easy to touch up, even though it had some chipping on it. No problems with the edge. So there's that. So slices through paper, and that's a good test right there. So right there you'll see some spotting, just pointing it out real quick. And that's what happens when you buy a used knife. You just got to clean it up, get it back in serviceable condition, and then you have no problems. So hope you enjoyed watching this, everybody. Have a great evening, and if you have any questions about this knife or the whole process, or you can see where I screwed up, feel free to leave a comment below. So this is just a nice long watch just to show you what I do when I buy a used knife. And maybe you do something similar, but hey, if you don't, tell me in the comments below. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.